This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
And welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, coming to you from our studios in beautiful, sunny, and warm Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on this 31st day of the month. My guest this hour is Dr. James Kroll. He is an electrical engineer by profession. He earned his PhD degree from SUNY, and that's Sunnybrook, back in 1997, and has gone on to work on the development, design, and management of various telecommunication projects with a number of highly visible telecom equipment providers. Dr. Kroll has also had a lifelong interest in dreaming, stemming from a number of unusual dreams, experiences, and intense nightmares that he had as a child. He had his first off-the-cuff lucid dream back in 1998. He found it to be a fascinating experience and read up on the subject in an attempt to induce these experiences more, readily, reliably. Now, early attempts met only with modest success. However, in 2006, Dr. Kroll rekindled his interest in lucid dreaming. By now, technology had improved and numerous websites had popped up dedicated to the art of lucid dreaming. With all of this additional information and options, he found it fairly easy to learn to lucid dream on demand. He has now experienced over 800 lucid dreams, and that's just in the last 4 years. Joining me now is Dr. James Kroll. James, welcome to the X-Zone.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
It's my great pleasure. James, can you describe for our listeners what a lucid dream is?
Sure. We all have typical non-lucid dreams every night, whether or not we remember them or not. Mm-hmm. Unless you've got some kind of biochemical irregularity, you're dreaming in roughly 90-minute cycles. The early cycles, you're only dreaming, you're in REM or stage 5 sleep for a short period of time. As those cycles progress, you spend more and more time in REM. There are a lot of people who believe that you need to wake up out of REM in order to recall your dreams, which does explain why some people have a better recall than others. Mm-hmm. And in this state, of course, and this will be meaningful to all of your listeners, we find ourselves where we think the situation is real. We find ourselves in pleasurable situations, frightening situations, and it all seems very real at the time. But of course, we wake up and we say, "Oh, I was just dreaming." But again, it's very real. It's very tangible at the time. The difference between a non-lucid dream and a lucid dream is fundamentally, in a lucid dream, you identify something that's unusual. Your logical processing manifests itself in some way, and you actually realize that you're embedded in a dream. And if I like to talk in analogies sometimes. It's kind of like the holodeck on the Starship Enterprise. You're embedded in a world that's a projection of your mind, as opposed to a projection of light and holograms. In this state, things feel quite real, and so on and so forth. That sort of describes the concept, if you will.
All right, James, you and I have to take a 2-minute commercial break. When we come back, more of Dr. James Kroll. We're going to be talking about lucid dreaming and much more this hour on the X-Zone. If you'd like to give us a call, toll-free worldwide, 1-800-610-7035. My email address is xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On MSN Messenger, xzoneradiotv@hotmail.com. And our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. And if you'd like to get your copy of the March 2010 edition of the X-Chronicles newspaper, send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, and we'll be glad to send you our link on Scribd. You'll be able to read the entire 44 pages online and see exactly what has got me so ticked off about the UFO community. I'll be back on the other side of this 2-minute break as the X Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network and X Zone Broadcast Network. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. And welcome back, Exonation. Dr. James Kroll is our special guest this hour. His website is www.mortalmist.com. That's www.mortalmist.com. James, when we're lucid dreaming, how does the logical side of our consciousness adapt to this world of fantasy?
Excellent question. Let me actually spin it around back to the non-lucid dream state. In a non-lucid dream state, I would argue, and a lot of people would argue, that essentially your logic and reasoning is turned off, which is to say you might be on a street, a 10-foot chicken walks by, you say, oh, boy, that's a big chicken, but you don't identify it as impossible, right?
Right.
There's plenty of evidence that the fact that your logic and reasoning is turned off has to do with the fact that your left cortex is not functioning at a high level, which is typically responsible for mathematical analysis, logic, processing, things of that nature. When you look at neurotransmitters that affect left cortex, you're looking at acetylcholine, you're looking at dopamine, things of that nature. These neurotransmitters seem to be on relatively lower supply during non-lucid dreams. And there seems to be a correlation between high levels of these neurotransmitters and an ability to become lucid or even have high cognitive recovery during a lucid dream, which is to say sometimes you might identify the fact that you're dreaming, but your cognitive recovery has not been fully manifested again. You might not recall the goals that you had, things of that nature. You're still somewhat caught into this fantasy, as opposed to a state where you've really fully recovered your cognitive ability, you remember some goals that you might have, you're interacting with this dream world not as a fantasy, but as an objectionable or an objective state that you're trying to extract information from.
Why do people dream?
Oh boy, there's about 9,000 theories on that one. I do not consider myself an expert on the concept of why people dream. Certainly, it seems that it's required for normal psychological balance.
Right.
I think that's very well understood. What dreams are anybody's guess. If you look at Eastern culture, they believe it's generated or sort of dictated by karmic threads that you pick up during the day, and they sort of manifest at night as sort of dream fantasies. It's anybody's guess. I don't consider myself an expert there.
All right, how would one, or let me direct the question directly to you. How do you induce a lucid dream?
Sure. There's and as you said in the introduction, there really is a heck of a lot of information out there and technology out there that's quite interesting. When you talk about researchers who have really made a mark, you're talking about Stephen LaBerge, you're talking about Tom Ushak, Scott Stride, a number of people who have really made a lot of progress with regard to understanding the dreaming mind and the biochemistry thereof. The long and short of it really is that it really boils down to biochemistry in the brain. And like we talked about, logical processing seems to be turned off in the brain. Well, how do you induce better logical processing when you're dreaming? The most common method, or the pharmaceutical method, if you will, is to buy acetylcholine. And, typically you could do that naturally by doing what's called wake back to bed. That's nothing more than sleeping 5 or 6 hours, getting most of your delta wave non-REM sleep over with, and staying up for about an hour. You'll actually develop a balance of neurotransmitters in the brain more consistent with being awake. If you do manage to fall back asleep, the balance in your brain is closer to a wakeful state than it is a sleeping state, and the neurotransmitter balance is favorable to inducing a lucid dream, if that makes sense. There's other technologies like dream masks that are essentially masks that you wear at night that have motion detectors on your eyes. It tries to detect if your eyes are moving consistent with REM. It flashes lights. The concept is that you're supposed to, is that the light and or sound might penetrate the dream. It's going to manifest in the dream in some sense, and you need to train yourself to see that in a dream. The problem with those devices, frankly, is some people can't sleep with them. They're too bulbous or too cumbersome. Sometimes the lights and sound wake the dreamer up, which is, of course, counterintuitive. There's a lot of discussion about brainwave entrainment methods. Personally, and we can talk about this a little bit later, there are a number of brainwave entrainment methods. I've discovered a method that I held a U.S. patent application on that involves the use of cranial electrostimulation to induce a brain state favorable to lucid dreaming. So, in the direct question, circling back to the original one, is most often I'm using basically supplements that bias acetylcholine, like choline, galantamine, huperzine A, nicotine, things of that nature, and or I'm combining that with cranial electrostimulation, which is sort of my homegrown method, if you will, of inducing lucids.
So can we say then, James, that lucid dreaming is controlled dreaming?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and again, it goes back to the whole issue of cognitive recovery. In a non-lucid dream, you're in no control. Mm-hmm. In a low-level lucid dream, you're in some control. You realize it's a dream, but you still might be a victim of the things that are going on in the dream, so to speak. In a high-level lucid dream, you are in control. And, you're projecting, and I think we'll get to this momentarily, you're projecting physical realities into that dream space, but all of those realities can be tweaked or twisted or broken if your level of consciousness is high.
Does lucid dreaming, induced lucid dreaming, have any danger to the person who is taking this dream psychologically or physically?
Outstanding question. Let me address the second one first. Physically, I've done the most daring, insane, dangerous things in lucid dreams at times, and I have never been hurt. So, we're all familiar with the fact, with the non-lucid dream where you're falling, you hit the ground, mm-hmm. You wake up before dying. Of course, you can't really, it's difficult for us to perceive what dying even feels like, what it even means, right? So the answer to your second question, no, there's no physical danger whatsoever. Psychologically, I suppose you could come up with arguments that you might somehow lose touch with what reality is. Hopefully we're all mature enough and all sufficiently astute explorers to identify this state special. It's got special rules, special laws, if you will, and they don't apply to what I would call our real world.
Because if Mother Nature intended us to zap ourselves into a lucid dream state at will, wouldn't she have built this into the system that we have?
Well, there's one argument, and you raise an interesting point. There's one argument that says, as a process of evolution, we've lost our ability to become lucid on dreams. And so what do I mean by that? What I really mean is, as a survival mechanism, mm-hmm. It doesn't make sense. You could argue for people to be lucid in a dream state, because if you were used to the laws and realities in a dream state, they wouldn't necessarily help you in real life, if you see my point. Which is to say, if you're used to jumping off buildings and flying and walking through walls in your dream space, well, these are not attributes or experiences that you want to pull into your real world, clearly.
So why would somebody want to invoke lucid dreaming? Sure.
The practical applications are extremely wide, and it's a very individual experience. It's to me to judge what people should do. It's not for you to judge. It's a very individual experience. Certainly, there's plenty of evidence that you could practice physical tasks in a lucid dream. Dr. LaBerge, in his classic book, Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming, talks about playing tennis in lucid dreams and actually practicing in a tennis game, improving the real performance. There's another example that I thought to throw on the table here because it would be, I think, of interest to you and your readers. It's relatively easy to eliminate recurrent nightmares in a lucid dream. And let me give you a fantastic example that I think your listeners will kind of relate to, if you will. Ever since I was a child, I had dreams about meeting up with aliens.
Mm-hmm.
And, now this is not my suggestion that I abducted, anything like that. More likely, I saw some kind of TV show, some kind of movie that scared the crap out of me, right? It generated what's called a negative karmic thread, and that negative karmic thread runs in your brain during the course of your life. Now, if you happen to see a show about aliens, you have a discussion about aliens, that negative karmic thread comes to sort of bubble up, and when you dream at night, you might have a dream, a lucid dream about aliens.
Mm-hmm.
And I for many, many decades, in fact, I had such dreams. If you go back to Tibetan dream yoga, what they talk about is basically becoming lucid and eliminating negative karmic threads. So what I mean specifically is once the negative karmic thread generates, if you will, a dream about confronting an alien, it's extinguished. It's gone. It's done. But the question is, how do you deal with the confrontation with an alien in your dream? If you deal with it negatively, which is to say you become frightened, you become scared, you remanifest the negative karmic thread again, which sits in your brain. If you basically address the confrontation with the alien in this example with sort of compassion, understanding, and understanding of it's a projection of your mind, it can't hurt you, the negative karmic thread is effectively extinguished, and it will never crop up again. So I was able to actually do this a couple of years ago. The recurrent dreams about aliens stopped. And it's an outstanding example of how you can use lucid dreaming to nullify a recurrent sort of nightmare. There's all kinds of discussions about addressing phobias and lucid dreams and things of that nature.
Is it possible that lucid dreaming is responsible for the majority of people who claim to have been abducted by aliens?
I've heard all sorts of theories, and it's interesting. It's interesting. I wouldn't blame it on lucid dreaming because, in principle, in a lucid dream state, your logic is high and your understanding of the situation is high. It's hard to say.
All right, Doctor, stand by. You and I have to take a commercial break with the news at the bottom of the hour. Exo Nation, our special guest this hour is Dr. James Kroll. His website is www.mortalmist.com. That's www.mortalmist.com. And we'll be back on the other side of this news break as the X Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network and the X Zone Broadcast Network.
This is the X Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
And welcome back. Dr. James Kroll is our special guest. His website is www.mortalmist.com. Dr. Kroll is a subject matter expert on the use of supplements to modify neurotransmitter levels in the brain to induce brain states that are conducive to lucid dreaming. He holds a recent patent application on the use of cranial electrostimulation to induce lucid dreaming. Dr. Kroll also has a lifetime interest in PSI phenomenon. He is now coupling his interest in lucid dreaming and PSI phenomenon to investigate the use of this unusual altered state of consciousness to design experiments that will hopefully shed some light on the connection between the dreaming mind and PSI. And once again, welcome back, Dr. Kroll. Great having you with us.
Thank you very much.
What is meant by the term PSI phenomenon?
Fantastic question, although I'm sure your listeners are quite astute in that regard. We're talking about precognition, which is the ability to get a sense of something before it happens,
Mm-hmm.
Of course. We're talking about telepathy, which is connection between two minds. Your father in Arizona has an virtually, and you get a sense of it, that type of thing. We're talking about clairvoyance, sometimes called remote viewing, or of course telekinesis, which is the ability of the mind to alter a physical substance in this reality.
Can you give me some scientific examples that proves, Doctor, the existence of PSI in some reasonable sense?
Sure. And this is a fantastic question. Probably the premier researcher in this regard is Dr. Radin, who is with the Institute of Noetic Guidance Sciences in California, if I recall. He has a very interesting skin conductance test that, if you really look at that data, I think, proves to a very high degree that precognitive abilities exist. And it's a very simple experiment, actually. He's got sensors on the hands. He's measuring skin conductance, and he has a test subject looking at a computer monitor. And randomly, he's flashing different images on the computer screen. Some are very innocuous images, like a garden, an outdoor scene, innocuous images. Some are more intensely emotional images, violent images, sexual images, things of that nature. Now, no great surprise, the skin conductance changes with regard to the intensity of the image. What was profound in that experiment is that the skin conductance changes before the image is shown. And it changes consistently about 2 seconds beforehand, which is a very clear example of precognition where the mind is anticipating something. There's a physical reaction to it. Now, non-believers are always going to come up with some kind of other explanation of this, but in terms of examples I know that are really profound, really scientific, if you will, that's kind of my favorite example.
Why does it seem like the dreaming mind can often pick up on PSI information, sir?
I've read all kinds of theories. Certainly, let's start with human experience.
Okay.
I have certainly had precognitive dreams. I don't believe I'm special. I think a lot of people have had these. The question becomes, why is the dreaming mind special? And there's all kinds of models about what consciousness is, okay? And let's really boil it down to that very question. There's a lot of speculation that consciousness does not reside in the brain. There's sort of speculation or hypothesis that the brain is a filter toward consciousness, and that the brain filters our awareness in a sense consistent with evolution, where we're engaged in the moment. We're only viewing and concerned with what's around us, and from a pure evolutionary perspective, that makes sense. But if you look at this brain as a filter model, and you speculate or you extend it to people who are savants, people who have had head injuries, things of that nature, there's plenty of documentation of savants who are inclined towards psi phenomenon. There's plenty of evidence and literature about people who have had head injuries and inclined to psi phenomenon, things of that nature. It really behooves us to ask the question, has the brain, been injured or is at risk of being, saying the incorrect word, not operating correctly, such that these people can tune into something that the average person can't. But when we talk about psi phenomena, we're really, the people who seem to be able to tune into it are usually able to quiet their mind, usually able to concentrate. They're usually able to get a sense, if you will, of something and not distracted by the noise that's around us, if that makes sense.
Has anyone explored lucid dreaming to investigate psi besides yourself?
To the very best of my knowledge, no. And I will tell you why it doesn't make sense. Lucid dreaming is a relatively hard state to achieve, at least historically it's been. Psi phenomenon has been a relatively challenging research field to explore. So what have you combined the two? You're shooting yourself in the foot, if you will. To the first point, lucid dreaming has become very achievable, okay? If you are intent on learning lucid dreaming and you're open-minded and you are practical about trying one technique at a time. You're practical about trying some supplements to bias neurotransmitter levels, things of that nature. And you give yourself some time, you can learn lucid dreaming. My concern at this point is a lot of the experts in psi phenomenon probably don't know how easy it's become with the advances in technology. So, again, what's interesting to me, coming full circle a little bit, if you believe that the dreaming mind is attuned to psi phenomenon because certain filters are disabled, if you will, then, even in a lucid dream, you're still talking about filters that are disabled, even though you're consciously controlling the dream to some extent. Some of what's happening in that dream is not under your control. Conversations with dream characters are not under your control. They're going to answer questions, or you can have experiences that are driven by, the karmic thread driving the dream. And it's an interesting coupling of a state conducive to lucid dreaming to investigate psi, which I think is just fascinating.
Now, I understand that you're working on an experiment, a dream PSI experiment, and I was wondering if you could share it with our listeners.
Sure. So let me give you the high level here, and I openly state that I'm trying to convince no one but myself. I walked into this saying, hey, this is an interesting problem. I've got some interesting attributes to my lucid dreaming. Let me try to construct something. I'll go to that second point first. In my lucid dreaming experiences, I seem to have a gift, if you will, to start a lucid dream where I began in real life. So what do I mean by that? Typically, I'll go downstairs at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I'll try to induce a lucid dream. I'll go on the couch. I'm not disturbing my wife or anybody else. And typically, when I find myself lucid dreaming, I find myself on the couch in my TV room. But of course, it's a projection of my mind. It's a dream that started where I left off in real life. And now, the interesting thing about that transition is if I could start off in a lucid dream where I left in real life, well, that opens up the possibility to leaving out different objects or things of that nature in the real world that I might retrieve in my dream space, if that makes sense. So basically, I came up with the notion of using the concept of zener cards, which are very well known in psi phenomenon.
Sure.
It's different symbols. And I've gone through different iterations of this experiment. I've done it about 50 times. I'm sort of tuning my ability and to influence the dream and the experiment and optimize it, if you will. But essentially, I've drilled down to a specific experiment where I'm moving in 3 zener cards. So I've got a star, a cross, and 3 parallel squiggly lines. So I take those cards, I randomize them, I put them face down on the kitchen counter before going back to sleep. I have no idea. They all, from the back of the card, they all look identical. There's nothing that would give away which card is which. I go to my couch and try to induce a lucid dream, or specifically try to induce a lucid dream where I find myself dreaming where I left off in reality. If I can, in fact, induce that state, I'll walk over to the cards, I'll randomly pick a card, and I'll try to blank out my perception of which card it is. Now that's an important point, because if I pick up a card and I think it's going to be a star, well, it's pretty well known in lucid dreaming that you can influence the visuals of what you're seeing in a dream. So if you think it's going to be a star, it's probably going to be a star. If you can blank out your mind, flip the card and what it is, well, you've got a chance to basically extract psi information, if you will. Now, interestingly, this is not precognition because you've already laid out the cards. The physical process of laying out those cards has happened. But I'm trying to use my dream space to perceive what those cards would be. Sometimes if I'm flipping a card, I would see a very distinguished shape like a star or a cross or whatever. And sometimes it's something that's morphed in some sense. I sort of record that information mentally. I go about my business. When I wake up, I say to myself, well, that was an interesting shape or an interesting image. Which image does it seem to be? Squiggly lines, cross, or star? And, effectively, I'll make a decision. I'll walk over to the card in question, and I'll flip it. And I've either got a hit or a miss. It's very simple. In most recent incarnation of this particular experiment, in the last 27 tries, I've had 18 hits. Now, you would expect about 9 hits, randomly speaking, based on this experiment. And 18 hits sounds interesting, but, it sounds like, oh, maybe he got lucky. When you actually model this as Bernoulli trials, which is precisely what it is, and you'll come up with a number of combinations of 18 things in 27 at a time, it's 400,000 and change. any particular sequence has a probability of about 1 in 10 times 10 to the minus 11th, blah, blah, blah. But the upshot is the probability of getting 18 hits out of 27 tries is about 3 in 10,000.
That's
The
right.
probability of getting 18 or more hits out of 27 is about 4 in 10,000. Now this kind of drives us to the classic situation where, okay, is he making stuff up? Did he get lucky, or is there something interesting going on? And it's the problem that all side researchers, fundamentally are going to confront. And it's a matter of interpretation. As I've said to some of my colleagues on Mortal Myths, boy, I can guarantee you I'm not making something up. I mean, what would be the motive? Secondarily, there don't seem to be any scientific flaws. And third, the notion of having, a sequence of events that has a probability of 4 in 10,000 is interesting. I'm not saying I've proven anything, but I'm saying it's interesting. And it's a very unique model where maybe we could leverage information from the dream space to identify things that are happening in what we identify as our real world, if you're following that long-winded story.
What do your colleagues say about the experimentation that you're doing with lucid dreaming?
It's very interesting. You go back to Radin's work, or you go back to the work of Diane Hennessy Powell, who wrote a recent book, ESP Enigma, that really focused a lot on the dreaming mind and ESP. You've got people in both camps. You're always going to have the very scientific type who demand scientific proof. And going full circle, boy, I haven't been videotaping myself. It wasn't part of the motivation. The motivation here is to prove to myself that it's possible to speculate from sort of a quantum physics perspective, if you will, or a theoretical physics perspective, if you will, what model justifies this happening in the first place. And maybe tweaking experiments and iterating between experiments and theory to sort of hone in on something that might be interesting, if that makes sense. You're always going to have people who insist on strong mathematical or scientific proof. You're always going to have people who are believers in the paranormal and things of that nature. And the interesting point I would throw on the table is, when we talk about some of these mysteries, when we talk about psi phenomenon, what was interesting to me is, well, my hypothesis is, it's not all about psi phenomenon, religion, shamanism. It's not all about quantum physics and Newtonian physics. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. And I think there are very special altered states of consciousness that give us insight into these phenomena, and that's really what I'm trying to hone in on, if you will.
Speaking about quantum physics, when I come back from this commercial break that we have to take, Doctor, this is our final break for this hour. Here's the question I'd like to leave you with, and maybe you can answer us when we come back. What's the connection between PSI and quantum physics? I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with Dr. James Kroll as the X Zone continues from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to get more information on Dr. Kroll, his website is www.mortalmist.com. That's mortalmist.com. That's www.mortalmist.com. And don't forget, if you'd like to get a copy of the March 2010 edition of the X Chronicles newspaper, in which I do a rant on my concern for the reality way of thinking of the UFO community, send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. I'll send you a link where you can read it on Scribd, along with 31 other editions of the X Chronicles. My name's Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Dr. Knoll and I return on the other side of this break as we continue from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, on the Talkstar Radio Network and the X Zone Broadcast Network. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. James Kroll is our special guest. His website is www.mortalmist.com. And James, what is the connection between psi and quantum physics?
Again, it's a speculative one. There's a lot of theories as to what accounts for psi phenomenon. I think the evidence for psi is overwhelming if you really look at the statistical basis and experiments and so forth. There's a lot of speculation. Certainly, the one that jives with me the best is the notion of a multiverse. It's pretty clear when you dig into quantum physics that there is this connection between consciousness and matter. There are those who speculate that human consciousness basically forks off different universes. I know that sounds like a rather profound concept. It's not my own. Many excellent quantum physicists believe the same thing. Interestingly, if you believe the notion that consciousness forks off multiverses or copies of the universe that you're a part of, and you sort of stick with one of them, if you will, it's interesting because the way I've actually modeled this dream psi experiment is to say, well, what if you left out those cards at a particular point in time, some sequence of events forked off a different universe? What if the dreaming mind is a projection into that universe? You'd be extracting information from that space without turning over the cards in your real world. It's sort of beyond the scope of what we could talk about on the radio. There's a number of sketches and conjectures I have on the website that kind of speak to that hypothesis.
What about mortalmist.com? What can our listeners find out about that?
Mortal Mist was started up about 2 years ago. There's plenty of other lucid dreaming sites on the internet, sites that boast 10, 20,000 members. Mortal Mist is a very small, very intimate site. Right now we have about 400 members or so. It's been up and running for about 2 years. I would call it more of a mature. It's very comprehensive, very easy to sort of acclimate yourself and get some help from some more experienced lucid dreamers. The thing I would offer to your listeners is that I'm sort of heading up what we call the Research Guild, where we're proposing a number of scientific experiments that leverage lucid dreaming for the purpose of science. So I've got a call for participation for people to try the cranial electrostimulation technology for lucid dream induction. I need a lot more data and a lot more human experience in that regard to understand how effective it is. We've got some ongoing experiments with regard to psi phenomenon. I've got some conjectures of my own, and again, these are not my own conjectures, but there are certainly people who believe that dreamers or astral voyagers are connected to ghosts in some sense. I don't think it's radically far-fetched, but the question becomes, if in fact ghosts or astral voyagers or lucid dreamers, how do you detect them? And again, if you can basically induce a lucid dream where you start in real life, if you will, well, then the notion of detecting an electromagnetic field, the notion of detecting negative or positive ions in relation to the astral projector or the lucid dreamer interacting with the real world, it becomes implementable. It's a provocative question and one that we're sort of just starting to dig into.
Dr. Kroll, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure talking to you and getting a better insight into what lucid dreaming is. I wish you much success, and if there's anything we can do to help you with your experimentation, or if you need to get a message out there, please let us know. We'll be glad to have you back on at any time.
Oh, my pleasure, Robin. Thank you very much for having me.
Good night, Doctor. Dr. James Kroll, Exonation, www.mortalmist.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as the X Zone continues live and around the world from our studios in beautiful, sunny and warm Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.